Welcome to Conversate, our podcast where we engage in conversation. On this week's episode, Aaron Gerke and Kevin Bender are having a conversation about God's plan and how God is always at work getting his plan done according to his promise. In particular, even at points where it seems like all hope is gone and things are dead, God is still working life because that's his plan, to bring dead things to life. We learn a lot about that through chapter 2 of the story as we're introduced to Abraham and his family, and we look forward to sharing this conversation with you today.
Well, hey, good morning, Kevin.
Morning, Aaron.
Oh, virtual clink.
Ding.
Ding. To our audio listeners, maybe you won't hear anything different, but to our video watchers, Kevin and I are in different locations this morning. So thanks to the wonderful people over at Technology, we are able to do this. Is technology a company? That would be a good brand name. Like, we own technology. No, it's crazy though. I mean, I was thinking just this morning, like, you know, the ease and comfortability of which, like, we've gotten used to so quickly, like doing stuff virtually and like, oh yeah, hey, let's just set it up on Zoom and no big deal or whatever. And I mean, honestly, like, before pandemic stuff, I mean, I was familiar with like some technology and things, but I mean, I've learned a lot like in the last year and a half or whatever about how to do all this different stuff. So
for sure. Yeah, I think across the board, right? I don't remember using video stuff like this for about like half a decade, longer maybe. Yeah, it was probably a decade. I was using Skype, and I call everything Skype now. Everything is just, it's a program that did video calling.
Yeah.
But like, I don't think it still exists, but you know, Zoom kind of destroyed it with the pandemic and being a great tool to use. But yeah, I used to Skype back in the day. Actually, the only person I really ever Skyped was a girl named Allie. I met her at a national youth gathering. Kind of had a little crush on her. Yeah, but she lived in Arizona, and we'd always set up these Skype calls, and I would always forget that there was a time change.
So, and that's what ended that, huh?
She was never there. So yeah, we fell out of communication, and here we are today. I mean, I'm glad we didn't fall away, buddy, because I'm in a time change.
I know, man. I know. Yeah, you're down there with the pastors conference for our district, right down in Wisconsin. And normally I love going to those things, but with the newest addition to our family, still sticking close to home in these first couple of weeks. So yeah, glad you can represent and experience that. And I mean, for you too, that's kind of your first, like, well, maybe not totally first, but first like full district kind of in-person gathering, like getting to meet some of those guys and our partners in the gospel, you know, regionally and stuff. So those are always a good kind of encouragement and networking opportunity, just to, you know, meet people and, you know, share stories and stuff. So
in like the first 30 seconds of being here, I saw the guy who facilitates our PALS, which is another conference for pastors program. I saw a girl who I played on the soccer team with at the seminary. And then I also saw a guy who was a vicar, which is like an intern pastor at the church that I grew up at. When I was a sophomore in high school.
Crazy.
I was the vicar.
And he's a pastor in our district.
And now, yeah, he just like a year ago took a call up to Park Falls, Wisconsin, and so he's in our district. And yeah, so pretty neat to touch base with a guy I haven't seen since 2006.
Wait, is that Sam Morshing?
Yeah, you know him?
Oh man, yeah. He was a friend of my brother's in college. Anyways, yeah.
Small world, everybody.
Yeah, to the people listening, sorry for our little.
But you know,
that's what happens when we get together. We like to say in our denomination, you know, like in the world, they say it's like 6 degrees of separation. You know, if you have a conversation like, hey, I know somebody who knows, but I feel like in our denomination, it's like 1 degree of separation. You're
Yeah,
like, hey, I know you. Uh,
that's about right. But it is cool. It was a cool reminder of how you spend a little season of time with a person and you have no idea, like how you'll impact them or where they'll end up, like in their life story. I don't think that Samuel Morshing knew that I would become a pastor. But for that year, he was that voice for me,
yeah.
tell me about Jesus and added to, I guess, the chorus of voices who have contributed to my faith. So pretty cool to come around full circle and see him where I am today.
Well, did you also know? Sorry, this is to our listeners. This means nothing to you, but did you know that he and your PALS facilitator are also good friends from
They
college?
were roommates, right? I think.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
there you go.
I learned that yesterday.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Small world.
Anyways,
All right.
small world. We better get on track here, or people are gonna just tune us out.
Our exciting lives, Aaron.
Oh man, I know. Uh, well, let's chat for a little bit about kind of our theme from this week, this chapter 2 of the story,
Yeah.
the family of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Right now, I preached on this, and you and I haven't had a chance to really chat about that sermon. Or I mean, you're teaching a Bible class to our junior high kids on that and stuff too. So yeah, let's just have a conversation on I mean, obviously there's a lot of stuff that happens in there, but um yeah, I don't know, what did you hear either in the sermon or in your own reading of that chapter?
Yeah, well, I think in the sermon, what was striking to me was kind of your opening story and bookended the biblical story in your sermon, which was your trip down to Nogales,
Yeah.
right? And that that kind of trash village, if you will. And
Yeah.
I've heard of other communities that essentially are doing what Nogales is doing. People who live kind of in the trash heap
Yeah.
because there are resources there. It's kind of coming from my own, I guess, life and situation. Sometimes it's easy to be very confused about why people would live in that kind of a scenario. But I think for a lot of those people, the reality is they haven't had the same opportunities in their life or the same people in their life to give them a chance elsewhere or otherwise.
Right.
And so they're kind of just making life work in the midst of what looks like, as you said in your sermon, kind of almost like death.
Right.
This discarded stuff, like this is trash, and
Right.
And people who by and large are discarded probably by society.
Right.
So yeah, so that was very striking to me in this notion that even here in a place where you would think there'd be no life, there is life,
Right.
and valuable life, right? These people matter to God,
Right.
and though by extension they matter to God's people, which is why that church who you worked through had kind of their mission plant of sorts
Right.
there in the trash heap is one. I love that because that's kind of when you think about God coming to earth,
Yeah.
he's up in the heavenly realms. Things are great. They're perfect. Down here, that's not really the case. We can all attest to the trash and pollution of our own lives and of the brokenness that we experience, and kind of just read the news any given day and you got plenty of fuel for kind of the difficulty and the death that really exists down here. And yet God comes down to his earth to meet us where we are. And so you guys on that mission trip, that was kind of cool. You got to, it's not like you said, hey guys, let's get out of here and come to a nice like clean building and a church space that's going to be good for you. No, like we'll come and be with you where you are.
Meet you.
Because life is here too.
Right. And yeah, I mean, I think like reflecting back on it in the moment, I don't think I saw the beauty or the like this theological reality of it. I think I just remember kind of being overcome with the experience of like, wow, we are in a garbage dump. Like, this is, I don't know, kind of emotionally like stirring. Like this is hard, but kind of reflecting back on it now, you see like, wow, no, this true beauty, like you just described, of this reality of the true life of Jesus being proclaimed in this place where people who are as good as dead to society living amongst the stuff that was as good as dead to the people who threw it away. Like the greatest source of life is even present there for them in Jesus. And yeah, I mean, that's our reality too, you know. As good as dead. You know,
Yeah.
that line, that I think that's what stood out to me, that's how I got to this kind of that theme. But that's actually from Hebrews. And like when reading through the story, like this, you know, that the actual like story book. You got your copy?
Teen edition.
Oh, you have the teen edition.
More my
Very-
speed. More my
Yeah.
speed.
Exact same words, but yeah, when reading through the story, that it grabs some of the stuff from the book of Genesis, but then also some stuff from the book of Hebrews, and it just kind of flows right through it. And you know, it was a little bit startling to me when reading the story. I'm like, that doesn't sound like Genesis. I don't think that's Genesis, you know. So then that's when I turned to that, like the back of the book, that page 494, and found the reference to Hebrews 11, and went there. But that whole idea of, yeah, I mean, Abraham and Sarah were as good as dead, and God gave life. Like that's the reality, right? Yeah. So it when reading through Genesis, what I don't know if I said it in the sermon. We definitely talked about it in the Bible class that I taught. Um, what's most important for us as readers of Genesis is to kind of take a step back and just watch God working his plan through it all, kind of regardless of what the people are doing and the decisions that they're making, because their decisions and stuff doesn't seem to make sense always. And from a human level, we're like, I don't know why they're doing what they're doing. But when you take a step back and you just read it, the whole scope of it, you're like, this is incredible how God is consistent to his promise to the people, that life will be preserved through them. So
That's kind of funny. You mentioned that in your sermon, that helpful kind of tip of when you're reading, not always the most helpful to like put yourself in the people's shoes and start to think about, like, you know, why did they do this, or what would have I done in this situation, you know, or why would God, you know, how would I feel if God did that to me, you know, kind of that, you know, like sometimes that just dives us into holes that we have no answers for, and it's really doesn't end up being that helpful.
Yeah.
And like you say, just see how God is working in a story. But it's fun. I didn't think of it when you mentioned your sermon, but just now as you were talking, Molly and I, we were watching a television show together, and I'll find myself doing the same thing to characters in those shows where I'm like, why on earth is this, you know, character doing this or that thing? Like, what a dumb, you know, move. Why, if I was you, I would not have done that. I totally would have done this other thing, or find myself kind of like casting judgments on like their decisions and being like, yeah, they're a good character, or they're a bad character, you know, because of these decisions. And you know, it's like it's I think that's very natural for us to do. Like, is people like to kind of make those like snap judgments, and oftentimes, yeah, we do kind of want to see ourselves in like that. The pivotal person in the story making the decisions. But you're right. I mean, like, this God's word is his story. Like, he is the pivotal person, right? And how is he responding? You know, and I say things like, you know, if I was this person, I would do that. But like in reality, you know, if I'm honest and I look back at my own decision making in my life, like reality, there's lots of dumb decisions I made. You know, like, what have I done this or that? No, God knows, but most of the time I'm just scrambling in the moment, and, you know, maybe you do the right thing, maybe you don't. But how is God in all of it responding and working? That's
for sure. I mean, I think good storytellers, their intent is to wrap you up in the story and to get you emotionally involved and viscerally responding and all that kind of stuff. And so I think we're, in a way, when you're watching a dramatic TV show or movie or whatever, that's what kind of draws you in. Like if you just kind of watch it from, I don't know, whatever, like it doesn't.
It's like a documentary.
Yeah, it's not all that, not as I don't know. It's You're not as connected to the story that way. But for scripture, again, it's not just pure entertainment. It's ultimately to see God's plan being fulfilled, right? And not like, because we talk, the authors of the story again talk about like the upper story and the lower story. The lower story certainly matters. All these decisions, it all matters. Our story matters. But ultimately what we're seeing play out is God's upper story, his plan of salvation being accomplished. And this plays out. I mean, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but I just read chapter 3 this morning, and you'll be preaching about that coming up. And yeah, we'll talk about that next week. But that story of salvation and life being preserved at God's hand, it very, very evident. So, but when you're talking, you were just talking a minute ago about like making bad decisions and like in your life, and like still seeing God work it all out. That's kind of what I very briefly like mentioned something of the sort in my sermon, where it was because I told 3 stories of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and with Isaac at the end of that, I mentioned that for Abraham and Isaac, after that story, I think that experience only deepened their faith and trust in God, because they had tasted death, seen, like, been there, and then had life restored, had life given back to them. And I mentioned like some people have had near-death experiences, like almost died, whether it be an accident or a diagnosis. And actually after church, and even since then, some people have been sending me stories, and I didn't even know, some people that I knew well, like almost dying, like in very real ways. But I also mentioned like dumb decisions that we make that should have turned out worse, and you look back in hindsight and you're like, I should have died, or my whole life should have like come crashing down, and it didn't. And I'm like, how is that possible, except for God? I mean, honestly, I really believe that. Just yesterday I was talking to my dad though, and my dad brought up this story, and I think I've shared it with you. I don't know if it's come up in this podcast, but when we had the big Father's Day flood here locally a couple of years back, and there was this kind of this miraculous situation where the timing was right, and there was a woman whose car was stranded, and I ended up encouraging her to get out of her car and get into my car, and then 5 minutes later her whole car was gone in a sinkhole, like washed. I mean, she would have died and all this stuff. So, and it was on Father's Day, and I mean, that whole thing ended up like working out. Her life was fine, my life was fine. And I remember at the end of that day, or maybe not at the end of the day, at some point during that day, my wife said to me, this day could have turned out totally different. And in my mind, I would just said, yeah, it could have. The whole time thinking about the woman's life, not about my life. It honestly, it was not until like weeks later, somebody said something that it snapped in my mind, where they said something to me like, you were very close to dying in that moment. And I was like, oh, I was close to, like, it never even crossed my mind. And then I told my wife, I was like, when you said that this day could have turned out different, you weren't talking about her, you were talking about me and us and our family. And she's like, yeah, like that's yeah. I never even crossed my mind that for me it was like a close to death situation. So yeah, kind of remarkable, reflecting back on all that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I can think of a time in my own life. It was I was probably like 12 maybe. My family took a trip out to the Rocky Mountains to go skiing. which is something my family did growing up a bunch, because both my parents are from Colorado. And so we're skiing, and there's two groups. There's like the fast group and the slow group. And the fast group was going down like, blues and black diamonds and moguls and things. And I was like, yeah, I wasn't at that level. And I was pretty scared. So I went with the slow group. And my aunt, Sue, was kind of like leading the slow group. And, she had this pink jacket on and was in the front of the crew. And it was kind of like, all right, everybody, stay together, follow Sue, and we'll kind of stop periodically to make sure everyone catches up. And so I'm skiing down the mountain. I'm following that pink jacket, and like I was kind of picking it up pretty well. I was feeling pretty good about myself, kind of confident in my skiing. And I'm like, sweet, I'm going faster than I thought I would. I'm here, I'm in the slow group, but I'm cruising. And I was like, but I still see that pink coat, so I keep following it. And like going for a while, we hadn't really stopped yet, but I still see that pink coat. I'm like, well, let's like I keep going, and then finally the pink coat stops, and I was like, okay, great. And I catch up. And it's not my Aunt Sue. It's someone else in like the exact same coat. And, as like a 12-year-old, I was like, oh crud, pooped my pants a little bit. Not really, but I was really, really scared. And I was like, well, I'll sit here and wait. They're probably behind me. I was going there for a while. So then I sat there and wait for what feels like, 45 minutes. It was probably like 5 minutes. And, they didn't catch up. So I was like, well, they're probably down on the bottom of the hill. So then I just start skiing down this hill. And I mean, this is the Rocky Mountains. I think we were at Breckenridge maybe, but I mean, they're huge.
Okay.
Like ski resorts. Lots of runs. You can spend a week there and not do all the runs. And, I come down this hill, and the hill splits, it forks, and one fork goes to one whole like ski resort area, and the other goes to an entirely different ski resort area. Not like two different lifts, like several different lifts across those. But I just like, well, I'll flip a coin, and took one and went to the bottom. And like, I was starting to get pretty nervous. And when I was a kid, we had satellite TV, and in the 900s was all these music channels.
Okay.
Listen to different music, and there was one. There's like a Christian music channel that I listen to sometimes. But there's a song that's called like "God Is Watching Over You." Great jam. Can't remember who sang it. I could sing it for you, but I won't. That'd be embarrassing.
That's not God is watching us. God is watching. Who's that? Like Mariah Carey or something?
No. All right, I will sing it. Since you sang, now I gotta step up to the mic. But it's like, God is watching over you. As always, you are loved, no matter what you go through. He's right beside you. So like, I started singing that, and I'm like singing it out loud while I'm skiing down this hill, and like, trying to keep my composure, but like, I'm like really afraid at this point. But like, that was really comforting to me. Is like, okay, no, like God's with me, like he is watching over me. So like this 12-year-old is clinging to this promise. And I get to the bottom, and no one's there. I take my skis off because I'm like stumbling around like a goofball trying to walk in them and go to a ski shop, and no one's there. And it's like, who do you even ask? You're just at this huge, there's tons of people, but they don't know you from Adam. So I wandered around for a bit, and then finally, like, I see a chairlift. I'm like, well, I should just go up again and go down the same run. Maybe I'll come across him. And as I'm walking towards the chairlift, I see my dad on one of the lifts going up. So I start like running to my dad. I'm like, Dad, like, I'm down here. It's me, and it was just him. The rest of the family was at the bottom. They saw me. They yell up to my dad on the lift. So like he sees that I've been found. And I'd like to say that the story ended with, like that the embrace of weeping tears. That was just joy of being returned. But there was also some scolding. But I mean, it was a time when I felt, maybe not dead, but like when you're lost like that, especially as a kid, you do kind of feel as good as dead. And that's kind of the same with the story of the prodigal son. He feels, well, his father says that he was dead, I know. No, he was ever going to come back. And like, that's how I felt. I was like, man, I don't know what I'm going to do. But God was actually watching over me and was, return me.
And I don't know how we go through those stories and those experiences and not come out the other side going, thank you, God. Like,
Mhm,
you are obviously real, you know?
mhm.
I mean, what a better way to live than to simply just go, oh wow, that was a mere coincidence, you know?
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Oh, and I was just gonna say, I mean, we so often we just write things off like coincidence. But I've heard, well, this is a Greg Finke line, I think, author in the Lutheran world, Joining Jesus
Okay.
on a Mission, good
Yeah.
book. But he says, I don't believe in coincidences anymore, just God incidences.
Yeah.
And I like that. And I think it's truer than sometimes we give it credit for. I mean, he's everywhere, and he's in everything. He's walking with us.
I
Of course
know.
he had his hand in this. And of course he hears so this would have been in the same story from this last week, but they can't have Abram and Sarah can't have their kid. And so they kind of go the human route and take Hagar, right?
Yeah.
Abram's
Or
servant,
Sarah's
Sarai.
servant. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. And
Yeah.
they have Ishmael. And
Yeah.
of course, he's not the child of promise. And then it causes a lot of strife. This was a bad move on their part.
Yeah.
They didn't really trust God. They tried to take it in their own hands. But then, Hagar, she's kind of cast out from the family. It's this heartbreaking story. And she's off in the desert. She like leaves her kid in the
Yeah.
bushes because she's
Yeah.
like, they're starving and thirsting to death. And
Yeah.
God hears her cries
Yeah.
and a child's cries.
Mhm.
So it's like God, I mean, he's listening and
Yeah.
he's very attracted to our cries, like a
Yeah.
father would be, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's because I mean that was the theme that I shared over and over again was that like the things that God that look dead, the things that seem dead, God gives life to. So God gives life to things that seem dead. So I mean, if we pay attention in the world, like I mean, you just talked about it the other day in one of your sermons, but like this world is a world of entropy. Like everything is slowly dying. Like we on our own, we're kind of as good as dead. I mean, honestly, like in our sin, like like on a spiritual level, very very much dead in our sins, and that's how the Bible even talks too. Like we are dead in our sins and trespasses of which we once walked, but God, who is rich in mercy, came to us and made us alive in Christ. This is Ephesians 2. Like, I mean, this whole thing from death to life, and life being only granted by God, the one giving life, us creating death for ourselves. That's the story of the scriptures, like over and over and over and over and over again, and ultimately the final promise that life does win, right, through the resurrection of Jesus and his promise to come again and make all things new. Like again, like in my sermon, I'm like, hey, big spoiler alert, but if we don't get this right, like right now, right from the beginning, I don't think we fully appreciate um, what it what Christ has done for us and has promised to do in all of eternity. Like
Mm.
it just won't make sense. It'll just be a nice idea, instead of a true reality of what life is. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. And I love, like keeping the resurrection on our minds.
Mm.
And as we walk through this, we're going to be in the Old Testament for a while here, but Jesus is the fulfillment of this, like these guys in the Old Testament, they're like just wondering when, I mean, Adam and Eve are wondering right away when they have their own kids. Hey, is this going to be the child of promise?
Yeah.
Break the curse.
Hmm.
Eve bears Cain and says, "I've gotten a man." She's like all excited, and like that
Yeah.
turned out so well.
Yeah.
Actually, Abel, his name just means like breath, like vanity. It's the same word that it comes up in Ecclesiastes a lot, hevel, which is like meaningless, which is kind of a knock on Abel. So you kind of see already there, she's thinking, "I've got the son, the child of promise." Second born. She's kind of like, I already got the promised heir, that God mentioned. And then, the reversal there a little bit in the story in terms of
Mhm.
who ends up kind of honoring God and when Cain's decisions. But even Cain, I mean, God comes down and even continues to preserve his life and offers
It
life,
marks him as belonging to God, right? I mean,
you know,
it's
and
amazing.
that's you almost need to hone in more on those, because that's, you know, our story too. Like not that I've in the teen video, Cain like stabs his brother with like a pitchfork, and it's like it's cartoony. It's cartoon, like it's just like, wow, you know, it's like it's a little goofy, you know, and like I haven't killed anybody in that sense, but oh man, you know, it's like I know I've damaged and hurt plenty of things in my life and relationships, and there are some of those that like again kind of feel dead. That's not it's never the end of the story for us, you know.
Right.
You know, and you said that even in relationships like Jacob and Esau, you know, if we have people out there who it feels like this relationship is dead, there's chance for life.
Yeah.
You know, we can't force a resurrection of a relationship, but we can always offer that life, you know, and the only way we're motivated by that is because God has offered us, you know, life and a relationship with him when we, you know, really had no right to have one, and, you know, have defaulted on our relationship so often. But,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a beautiful story. I mean, yeah, I love Genesis. And to those of you who are listening, you know, if you're reading it from the story, just do yourself a favor and read Genesis right straight from the Bible too. I mean, the narrative it's not that hard to read, and it's kind of good reading, you know, as you're going through this. And also, I mean, I was just reminded too, like over the last 2 summers, like we preached through Genesis, so we have actually a lot of resources, you know. I mean, you can go back in our sermon archive and see sermons on just little pieces of this story as we're telling it kind of in big chunks. We've also been able to tell it in smaller pieces as well over the last couple of years. So very cool. Kevin, I think that's good for today. And so as always, buddy, it's good to be with you, even, you know, through the aids of you know, Mr. and Mrs. Zoom. And I think that's their name. That's who the company's owners' names, right? That's why it's called Zoom, I think.
Oh yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Sure.
Ted Zoom.
Ted. Yeah, something like that. All right. Well, hey, enjoy the rest of that pastors conference, and we'll see you back here very soon. God bless.
Sounds good. Thanks for the conversation, brother.
Yep.